Okay, so back to business. Where were we? That's right, you were going to tell us how you were a child prodigy and your parents groomed you for scientific greatness from day one before a terrible tragedy halted your ascent.
Close, but not exactly. Actually, that is not close at all. Most of my early education was devoted to religious studies. We can talk about that later, but that lasted from when I was in kindergarten until the summer between 6th and 7th grade.
That seems like a very specific timeline.
Some very specific things happened, none of which are relevant yet. Throughout that phase of my life, the only exposure to science I had was the theory of evolution. Most of the information I was taught about the subject of evolution sought to discredit the concept in favor of creationism. I had zero interest in anything scientific until I was introduced to a theory that contained a mathematical equation. That happened in Mr. North's 8th grade art science class.
So you spend your whole life studying religion, mysteriously stop that for some reason, then fall in love with science as soon as you realize it has math in it.
I wouldn't say it that way. I certainly was not expecting to be interested in anything the science teacher had to say. The lesson started out exactly the same as every other lecture I had ever gotten from any adult regarding anything.
Today, class, we are going to learn about Sir Isaac Newton. He is a really old guy that died a long time ago and did a bunch of stuff like blah 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 and most importantly blah.
So what changed? How did seeing the math make you fall in love with science?
Nothing changed, at least not right away. It wasn't like there was a flashing light or loud siren proclaiming this is science as opposed to religion. At that point in my life, I had no idea how divided people can be regarding those two topics. As far as I was concerned, this was a seamless part of my ongoing studies. The reason the equation matters is because it seemed to be something specific enough that I could ask a simple question and be provided a simple answer.
Hang on a second. If everything in the universe is attracted to everything else, how come everything ain't just smashed together in a big ball? That's a great question. When you study physics, you will learn about conservation of momentum and other equations that help us understand how all the planets are still spinning in precise orbits. Yeah, but should all that stuff be in this equation if it had to do with gravity? Why is this equation so great if it don't make sense by itself? That's a great point. Tonight I will try to think of a way to help you understand this material. Don't feel bad if it takes a while. These are very complex topics.
Sounds like you were a child prodigy to me. I mean, you look at probably the most utilized equation in the history of science written on the board and have the insight to tell the teacher how the theory is flawed.
I did not think the theory was flawed, and I was not thinking I had any real insight into the specifics. All I was doing was exactly what my parents taught me to do during my religious studies. If I come across something I don't understand, question it. That's all that happened. He wrote the equation on the board and I didn't understand it. I asked him for more information. He offered to provide more insight. For the first time, I was excited for the next day of school so I could learn more.
Today, class, we're going to be learning about plate tectonics. Yo, Mr. North, I thought we were gonna finish our talk about gravity. Is there a specific question you have? I guess I got to if you didn't think of a way to help me understand these theories any better. First, how can I learn this stuff better? Second, if I go to the bottom of the Grand Canyon and drop a feather, will it fall sideways and stick to the wall? Well, the answer to the first question is easy. Go to college if you want to learn more about these theories. As for the second question, I wish we had all the time in the world to go into these philosophical discussions. Unfortunately, we have a test next week to prepare for. I suggest you memorize the material so you can pass the test as is required.
Hey, wait a second. Did he forget about your question?
Who knows? All I know is the response he eventually gave convinced me I would never understand science.
How can you say that? You were obviously very smart if you can see a problem with an equation in the 8th grade. Seems to me like you were destined for a career in science.
I cannot comment on any of that. I certainly did not feel smart when I was unable to understand the equation on the first day. I felt even dumber on the second day. Dumber isn't the right word. Hopeless, that's it. I felt dumb on the first day and hopeless on the second day.
Why on earth would you feel dumb and hopeless? This story is not making sense to me.
My very large family was very poor. The unwritten expectation was I would quit school as soon as I could get a job chopping down trees or drilling for oil. As soon as Mr. North said I would have to go to college to understand the material, I knew right then I would never be able to understand it because going to college was an impossibility.
Any chance you are using being poor as an excuse? Poor people go to college all the time.
You have to remember two things. This was long before the current student loan industry we see today existed, and I did not come from a science background. You assumed my parents were grooming me for scientific greatness. It is more realistic to assume my parents were grooming me to be a leader in a religious organization. This experience was a scientific blip on my otherwise religious tenure track.
That still doesn't explain why you felt hopeless. So what if you become a preacher instead of a scientist?
As I mentioned earlier, my religious education had been terminated for over a year by the time I learned who Sir Isaac Newton was. When Mr. North said I asked a great question, and said he would think of a way to help me understand the material better, I was elated.
You viewed it as a way to continue studying something, since you weren't allowed to study religion anymore.
Yes, there is more to it than that, but for now, that is a great insight to how I felt at night. I spent hours trying to come up with a way to express my frustration with the theory. I felt the thought experiment of a feather falling sideways near the wall of the Grand Canyon was a perfect way to illustrate the fact that I had never seen anything fall sideways. Things only fall down.
And you were hoping he would come in and explain to you why things only fall down.
Yes, that or explain that things do fall sideways sometimes and explain when that phenomenon occurs. Like I said, I did not have any real insight. I just could not rationalize the equation on the board with my personal experience.
And when he said you had to go to college in order for that rationalization to occur, you resigned yourself to the fact that it would never happen because going to college was not something your family considered doing.
Yes, that's right.
Okay, so what happened to change your trajectory? Were there other examples of similar instances in high school? Did you get exposed to enough science that you eventually felt compelled to go to college?
Yes and no. I was obviously exposed to science beyond Sir Isaac Newton in high school, but every experience I had further solidified the assumption in my mind that I was too dumb for science. The next time I felt compelled to ask a question about a scientific topic was in physics. Mr. North had retired. The new science teacher, Mr. Dribble, was teaching us about Newton's 3 laws of motion.
If every action has an equal and opposite reaction, how do chairs break? Won't the chair equally react on me when I sit on it? That's a great point. We can see examples all around us where this knowledge can be used for further discovery. Yeah, but how do you explain that? Nothing should be able to break if every action has an equal and opposite reaction, right? I don't need to explain anything that isn't going to be on the test, and your cute little questions about how you think Sir Isaac Newton is wrong will most certainly not be on the test.
I thought Mr. North said you would learn more about how gravity and other stuff works in physics. Did that happen, or did you just end up more confused?
Maybe if Mr. North had been my physics teacher, he could have bridged that gap. I doubt it, but maybe. I was way more confused coming out of physics compared to when I started. It was like everything worked sometimes but nothing worked all the time.
Isn't it true everywhere? Aren't there exceptions to every rule? My favorite is I before E, except after C, or sounded like is in neighbor or way.
Don't forget the list of exceptions. Either, neither, seizure, weird. There are a ton of other exceptions to this rule.
Exactly. So why be upset about rules having exceptions?
Because science has the reputation for not having exceptions. Sir Isaac Newton called his gravitational constant the universal gravitational constant. Doesn't that suggest his theory is applicable everywhere, no exceptions? It claims to be universal, after all.
It's not universal.
Maybe you could make the argument it was universal in the 1600s when he came up with the theory. What the heck did anyone know about the universe in 1687 when Newton published Principia?
I'm starting to get the sense that you have a real problem with Sir Isaac Newton.
Yeah, I can get worked up about it sometimes. The main takeaway is at a relatively young age, I felt I was unable to understand his theories. Anytime I asked a question about it, I was told wait for college.
Do you have any examples like the ones you shared that don't deal with Newton's theories?
Yeah, sure. Mr. Dribbla's chemistry class.
So how does the potassium know to go to your thyroid and not your liver or brain? That's a great question. All chemicals react a certain way with other chemicals. If a chemical wants to react, we say it has a high affinity. If it doesn't want to react, we say it has a low affinity. Yeah, but how does it know what it wants? Like, how does potassium have an affinity for a thyroid and not a liver? If you're really interested in the finer details of chemical affinity, I'm confident your college professor will be more than happy to answer every question you have. If you're trying to distract me from the course material, I'm afraid that won't work. We have a test next week we need to prepare for, and this material will definitely be on it.
I have a ton of examples from high school. We can talk about those or move on beyond public education.
How about I make a quick phone call, then we move on to something other than high school stories. I want to hear more about why you stopped studying religion.
Don't worry, I won't keep that a secret from you, but in order to satisfy the conditions of our bet we have to stay on track.
Okay, whatever. I'll be right back.